Doody is one of those people everybody feels like they know because we partied with his family for a lot of years. We all have our favorite dishes, whether it's the lobster bisque at Lindy's, the nut-crusted Romano chicken salad. We all know what we like at all of his restaurants, and it comes from a lot of hard work and a long, long history of knowing how to work the stove. So you're going to hear from Chris today. He, in 2010, opened his fast food concept called Piata. So I'm sure a lot of you are customers there and have your favorite food there. But before that, he ran the Bravo Brio Group with his brother before they sold to a large investment company. And I know barely enough to make sense about what all that means, Chris, so you can explain when you get up here. But before that, his family was a part of bringing us this town, Lindy's. So everybody, I'm sure, has stories of what they've done at Lindy's, the parties they've had there, the receptions, the events, because it's been such a part of our lives, like food typically is. Before that, Chris went to Tulane University, and then left there to go work in New Orleans for places like Brennan's. Aren't they famous for their bananas Foster? Is that what they're known for? So we're looking today at a man who knows how to cook. So let me tell you what kind of accolades he has received. I had to read this part of it. He's a two-time recipient of the Hot Concept Award from Nation's Restaurant News, recipient of the Smart 50 Award, recognizing top executives of the smartest 50 companies in the region for their ability to effectively build and lead savvy organizations, and the True Trep Award from the Elliott Group. He was notably recognized in the Nation's Restaurant News Power List as one of the most powerful people who are leading and shaping change in the restaurant industry today. And in addition, his pioneering vision and leadership at Piada has received national recognition as the 2018 Fast Casual Top 100 and the Restaurant Business 2017 Fast 50 lists. In other words, like I said, this man knows what he's doing. So help me welcome Chris Doody to the stage.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you for having me here today. I wanted to first give a special thanks to Lori Wengard because she was critical in helping our family through a very difficult time this year. Many of you knew my mother, Sue, who passed away in April. Lori was one of the first people I called to assist us with my mom, and my mother was fiercely independent. She was a wonderful mother and grandmother and businesswoman, but she really wanted to pass in her home. And so she was very stubborn for those last few months. But Lori made it great, and Kitty was awesome. Thank you for taking care of my mom. While there may be a lot of interest in what I do, I think it is important to pay tribute and honor my mom. Sue gave us the work ethic and the philosophy of believing in others that has guided us in all of our businesses and our family values. While I was reading about the Rotary, and I've spoken to many groups and have taught classes at Tulane Business School, your values and what you stand for, truth, service above self, fair to all concerned, building goodwill, beneficial to all concerned. Those are not dissimilar to the values that we started with when Sue and my brother Rick and I started Lindy's. Obviously, genuine hospitality is critical to the success of a business. Sue's philosophy and the philosophy that we've had for many years through all of our businesses is go above and beyond for the guest. And we do refer to you as guests because that is really what we started with having people eat at my mom's house. She was a great cook. So we had a philosophy, never leave dissatisfied. So if you ever go to Lindy's and you're dissatisfied, let me know. So we'll fix it. Take care of your team members. Sue's loyalty, the loyalty of her staff is second to none. Todd and Grant and Chad, many of you know them, have been there for 10, 15, 20 years, and they are outstanding. We also had an intense focus on food. So having spent several years eating my mother's food. Obviously, we all found a love for it. That's where my career started, bussing tables, doing the construction. Lindy's was not always successful. It started out losing $150,000 a year, and that was in 1981. So that was a lot of money at that time. Lindy's was not as big as it is. So the back room of Lindy's, which many of you have sat in, did not exist. It was just the front room and the middle room, and it was only 90 seats. And 90 seats really wasn't big enough to run a successful business. We couldn't get enough table turns, and so we expanded the restaurant, even though it was losing money. So it was a little bit of a risk. I think Lindy's has become an institution, and it's primarily because of my mom, for sure. It was her hard work. She did start with the gourmet group, cooking classes for her friends in Arlington. I obviously ate very well as a child. And so the love of food, we were fortunate enough to travel all over the world and eat very well. Lindy's was really, there wasn't a lot of restaurants in Columbus back in 1981, those of you that would know. And TGI Fridays probably was one of the better restaurants. And that's a very successful chain, so that's not a slam on TGI Fridays. But really, to get fresh fish, dressings made from scratch, in 1981, there wasn't a lot of restaurants doing that. So she was pioneering something that really didn't exist. The bar in Lindy's was not in the front room when we bought the business. So the bar came out of the Neal House downtown, which was an old hotel. So the copper top bar, which now has been redone, if you've been in the last couple of years, which I hope you have, is really a new bar, but with the old look, the look that didn't really change. So Lindy's was successful for many reasons. It was a value proposition, better food, better service, and it had Sue Doody for sure to run it. We have a lot of funny stories about Lindy's. One I'll share with you. Bussing tables, early in I was on my way to college, and I got the idea that I knew more than I did. So I was walking in through the kitchen off of Mohawk, and the dumpster area is right off the side there, and it smelled awful. It was just, it was awful. And I walked into the kitchen and told the chef, hey, you need to clean that up. I won't mention the chef's name, who's a local chef, very talented chef in town. And I told him to clean it up. He proceeded to take all of the finished plates that were ready to go out for lunch, the place is packed, shoves them onto the ground, smash, trashes all the food, walks off the job. Comes back a few hours later after he calmed down. Moral of the story is, don't tell the chef what to do unless you can do his job. And I couldn't at that time. So my background obviously started in New Orleans. I went to business school at Tulane, and while at Tulane, I had the opportunity to work for the Brennans. And if you've been to New Orleans is clearly one of the 4 major food cities in the country. My dad's family was from there. And so I got a job working for the Brennans at Mr. B's, and I had to take a test. So when I applied, they gave me a cooking test. So it was just an application. It was actually a cooking test. And I proceeded to fill this out, but I didn't know any of the answers. I had never cooked. So I flunked it terribly. And the chef came out, talked to me, and I look, it's an open kitchen, and I see him back in the back with the chefs, and they're all laughing hysterically. They're reading my answers. And he comes back out and he says, are you from the cooking school? I said, no, I go to Tulane, I go to business school, but my family owns a restaurant in Columbus, and I'd like to learn the business. I'd like to learn to cook. Gerard Maris was his name, I'll never forget it. And he gave me a job. I ended up working 50 or 60 hours a week while going to business school, and got a business degree, And I like to say I got a culinary degree working for Gerard. So it was instrumental in working in a high-volume restaurant in the kitchen, learning how to make soups, sauces, deboned chicken, duck, fish, you name it, we did it. And Mr. B's is a great restaurant, as is Commander's Palace. So that was a defining moment in certainly my career, thanks to my mom. Rick and I started the Bravo chain in the early 90s, and obviously we had a lot of experience at that time, but it wasn't always easy. Well, let me tell you one story about, well, I won't tell you that story. It's probably not appropriate. Well, I will then. Shit. So we had a chef at Lindy's who liked to play tennis. And he was brought in with great fanfare, and he was from Houston. His name was Bruce Molzan. And we brought all new china for this guy, and, you know, it was a big deal. And I was just graduating from Tulane, didn't know what I wanted to really do, and so I started working in the kitchen for Bruce. And Bruce and I would play tennis on Sunday nights at the Indoor Racket Club. And this was in the winter. I graduated in the winter quarter. And Bruce was a good player. And so typically beat me 2-0. We'd play 2 out of 3 sets. And one night I beat him. Now, we own the apartments behind Lindy's. And those of you that have eaten there, obviously many times, the courtyard didn't exist. Those were part of the apartment buildings at the time. The terrace was upstairs. And so one night I beat him. And the next day he was gone. True story. Literally, we knew he was gone because his tennis racket was gone. And so I was thrown into the Lindy's kitchen in the mid-'80s. So if you ate there then, I'm sorry. I apologize. It was trial by fire. So in the early 90s, Rick and I began to develop the Bravo concept. Bravo was designed to be positioned just above Olive Garden and Macaroni Grill. Elevated design at the time, a $15 to $18 price point versus Olive Garden, which would be $12 to $13 at the time. The challenge was we had no money. So the first one on Bethel Road was a smashing success, as many of them were. But the challenge was the bank wouldn't loan us the money to buy the building. I won't mention which bank it is, although I do a lot of business with them today. So they said, well, get your parents to co-sign. Get your parents to co-sign. Some of you knew my father. And my father said, well, why don't you go back and tell them to just pound salt. We're not going to co-sign. The long and short of it is we got an SBA loan. We bought all of the furniture and the kitchen equipment used because we couldn't afford to buy it new. And we did a lot of the construction ourselves. And I think that was an important discipline in our success of not overspending on the capital improvements of a new restaurant. So we had that philosophy for many years. We did a lot of the construction. We opened a restaurant in Dayton, and I received a bid to put a new roof on it. And the bid was $90,000. Well, the whole project was going to cost $500,000. So clearly I couldn't afford to spend $90,000. So at that time, I went over to the local Heckingers. I don't know if you remember Heckingers. It was before Lowe's and Home Depot. And I drove a Ford Taurus. And I bought 15 5-gallon buckets of tar, some mops and some brooms. And I had to make several trips, obviously. And we proceeded to mop this roof ourselves. We really didn't know what we were doing, but it worked. It stopped most of the leaks. The problem was we didn't have any other clothes or shoes to get home. I don't know if you've ever mopped a roof with tar, but we went home in our socks or in our bare feet, and we did have our clothes, but they were ruined for sure. But those are the things we had to do to be successful, and I think later on we were able to do it a little bit better and use professionals too. I think a year later we had to have that roof replaced. So it wasn't always easy. It was a lot of hard work. We built that company into 60 restaurants in 15 years, and then we sold it in 2006. I left on that transaction, and started to think about what was next. Not being one to sit for long, I began the research on what really was going on in the industry, and at that time, the fast casual segment, which you would refer to as Panera or Chipotle, was just really taking off. And no one had really cracked the Italian fast casual concept. So after several trips to Italy with my chef, we wrote the menu for Piata on the back of a napkin on the way home. And I decided, well, I really had to start this right in Columbus, having built restaurants in Columbus. I didn't want to get laughed out of the city. So I spent more time, I spent about $500,000 building a test kitchen in my office, and the $500,000 included all my overhead with my chef, because he wasn't cheap. But I did that for two reasons. We focus grouped the concept for about 6 months, invited 300 or 400 people, 30 at a time, and really used them as guinea pigs to try the food. Most of them thought it was really good, so that helped us proceed. The second thing we did was design the restaurant in a way that would facilitate building a lot of them if it worked. So we spent a lot of time on the logo, on the branding, so that if this first one worked, then maybe we'll build a bunch of them. So we built the one on Lane Avenue for about $500,000 at the time, and we thought, well, if it does $1.1 million, that's okay. We'll figure it out. It'll make some money. And it ended up doing $2.7 million, and so that's about $1,000 a foot. So obviously it was much more successful than we thought. But I think the reason we were able to build stores 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 relatively quickly was because we had figured out what we wanted to be and successfully were able to build more stores. So today there's 41 Piatas in 7 states, 12 major markets. Most of them work. There's a few that don't. I call those dogs. We all have dogs in the system, but for the most part, it's been a good concept. I think the food is fresh. Some of the challenges that we face, for those of you that have tried it, when we opened the first store, it was a create your own concept, and so it was a little confusing for people to navigate the what we call the delivery system and pay at the end. And so, but the sales were so good that it was a little bit misleading. And so today, the concept is more of a menu-driven approach for those people that don't want to stress out going through a line and picking out their items. And I think it's helped ease that first-time user to use the concept, and the items are excellent. Obviously, we're continuing to try to improve them. It's a good little business. It has a lot of potential, and we'll see how many more we build. This year we're probably just going to do 1 or 2. We did 12 last year, so 12 in 12 months, which is what I call a blow your brains out strategy. And with that, comes a lot of issues, but we're pretty disciplined around how much they cost to build and so forth. So I think a lot of restaurant companies get in trouble when they spend too much to build them. We've been doing this long enough now that I feel like I know better. So thanks for having me. I hope you enjoy the restaurants. Yes, John.
When you think Italian, spending all that time in Italy, I'm sure you drink a little bit of wine.
Yes.
Have you ever thought about offering wine services?
Yes, we did originally. And the challenge is today there's many people producing great wine in what we would call a vehicle. I call it a vehicle, which is a bottle or a can that you can buy single serve. The challenge in fast casual is if you have the young people serving you, they have to be 21. We don't want them trying to open a bottle of wine because Most of them don't know how to do that. We do have liquor licenses in some stores, but the challenge has been, it's evolved. I think Lane Avenue gets a very broad demographic. Some of our stores would skew younger, but we found that the wine was only 1% to 2% of sales, surprisingly, with beer. So it's more about speed and convenience. The biggest change in the business has been when we opened, for example, Lane Avenue is 2,800 square feet. 70% of our business was dine-in. Today it's 70% to go because of all this third-party deliveries, catering. The whole segment now has changed because people don't, they want it brought to them. So it's really changed a little bit over the last few years. Yeah.
I just ate there last night, so.
How was it?
It was great, yeah.
Good.
Any new markets upcoming? Might not be able to divulge, but any areas that you'd like to get, like New England or?
Yeah. So the key with Piada is clustering restaurants. So you get brand recognition. So unlike, I got to get in my jab on Cameron Mitchell because I know he's coming after me. Cameron's a good friend of mine. We call each other the axis of evil. He's the North Koreans. So you can when you see him, you can tell him that he'll laugh because he thinks he's the South Korean. But new markets. So we're in Dallas and Houston, and I think that the challenge with growing a business rapidly is you can get out over your skis pretty quick. And so we have 9 stores in Columbus. So Columbus is a great test market for retail and restaurants. For example, there's 45 Paneras in Columbus. People don't realize that. There's over 40 Chipotles. So if you can build 9 Piatas in Columbus and successfully, we think the market potential for the brand is great. But it takes a little longer than 5 or 6 years. So, but we think major metropolitan areas, where there's a lot of density, big universities. So those are yes.
What was the biggest bad surprise and how did you deal with it?
Where do you want me to start? I'd have to come back.
Repeat the question.
What were the biggest surprises or challenges?
Unpleasant surprise, oh my God, what are we going to do now?
Well, there's been many. I think that, so I brought a private equity investor in 5 years ago as a minority shareholder, and I think, it's almost like being public. You have this short-term view of returns. So that's tough in this business. You got to have a long-term view. So I think we've expanded into new markets a little too quickly, and so we've had to throttle back a little bit. I think the biggest challenge today is getting the consumer to try new things. So if you go to Piada and you've hacked the system, you've figured out something you like, and you go, that's great. But you don't vary from that, and you probably do the same thing at Lindy's. You have your go-to. The shrimp and angel hair dish is from me, by the way, from New Orleans. And so the challenge is going from a create your own concept to one that's a little bit more menu driven, which I feel ensures a better experience for the guest. But, people's really the biggest issue. Clearly it's how do we hold on to and develop our staff and team members in this market with all of the wage increase issues and health insurance issues. So, thanks so much. Yep, you're welcome. Thank you.
That was really good.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks very much.
Okay. Chris, thank you so much. This is Foodie Month. Chris was wonderful enough to share his honesty and candid nature and response cards. I gave him a 5. I was vacillating between a 4.9 and a 5, but he included the 4-way test, so I made it a 5.0. Chris, you might want to come next week. We have Steve Stover on the restaurant scene, And you're welcome to come the week after that and give Cameron a hard time. We'd find that. We have a fifth one down. It's unofficial to the 4 copyrighted 4-week test. See at the bottom it says, and is it fun? So you are very much a fun and engaging entrepreneurial speaker today. Thank you so much. Next week, the program committee, and if you'd like to participate, committee meetings are always open, is going to meet before the luncheon program at 11 o'clock here with Chip Chapman as the chair. We'll decide where to meet next week based on the turnout. But again, program committee next week, 11 o'clock. Thank you for all of you who have brought great speakers to Rotary this year and always. It is an important aspect of why we gather. We also gather for fellowship and networking and our service projects. We've got a balanced Rotary experience of good content of speakers. Thank you, Chris, today. Of fellowship networking, the Happy Bucks I thought were really splendid today. And 3 service projects so meaningful and impactful in the month of December. Thank you for being the inspiration. Meeting adjourned.